Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to today's Chief Learning Officer webinar, sponsored by Class Technologies. I hope everyone's having a great day today so far and excited for today's webcast, Better Together, Cultivating Community and Connections in Workplace Learning. My name is Steve, and as always, I'll be working in the background here to help answer any general or technical questions you may have. Before we begin, though, I want to go over a few key reminders. First, there is no dial-in number for attendees. All audio will be streamed through your speakers or headphones, so please adjust your volume there accordingly. Now at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a variety of icons. You will have access to all these tools throughout today's session, so please feel free to customize your console however you would like. Technical issues throughout this webcast today. Go ahead and click on the purple icon marked Q&A. Type your question in that box, and an answer will appear from me if it's a technical question. But for content-related questions, we will save for our speakers at the end if time allows. The certification codes for this webinar will appear in the certification box located to the right of your slides once you have met the required watch time. Apologize about that. Don't forget, you can chat with your fellow attendees by joining the live attendee chat. And finally, you will receive a link to the recording of this webinar in a follow-up email. So please allow at least 24 hours after the conclusion of the event before the information is sent. And now at this time, I'm going to pass things over to Ashley St. John, Editor-in-Chief for Chief Learning Officer, and she's going to go ahead and get us started. So Ashley, take it away.
Thanks so much, Steve. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's discussion, Better Together, Cultivating Community and Connections in Workplace Learning. Again, I'm Ashley St. John, Chief Learning Officer's Editor-in-Chief, and we're so pleased to have you all join us today as we dive into this conversation about prioritizing connection and community in hybrid and digital environments. I'd like to extend a special thank you to Class Technologies for their sponsorship of today's event. And I'd also like to thank our speakers for joining us today, including our session moderator, Ben Lowell, who heads Corporate Strategy and Partnerships for Class, Lowell Duringo, Senior Manager, Learning and Talent with CrowdStrike, and Detlef Hold, Head of Digital Learning Experience with Roche. And Ben, I'll go ahead and pass it over to you.
Thanks, Ashley. Excited to be with you and appreciate the opportunity. Just for everybody's information, a little bit about Class. Class is a company that was founded during the pandemic. Our founder and CEO, Michael Chasen, is the former CEO and the founder of Blackboard. If you're familiar with that educational software, it's been around for many years. He watched his children experience learning virtually via the pandemic, and all of the process, the tools. It was a little bit rough for his students, his children specifically, watching them as students. And so he had this concept of creating a more engaging experience in the virtual classroom. And so Class was born. We have a product that enhances the virtual learning experience. And we're a company that's fully remote. We're all over the world. So we use our technology on a daily basis because none of us are in the same physical location. So it's quite a unique experience. But I'm really excited to be here with you all today. And I want to give a chance to our two panelists to introduce themselves. So Lowell, I'm going to turn it over to you. Give us just a little bit of your background. Tell us what you've been doing over the past, over your career, and then we'll turn it over to Detlef in a minute.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. I have to admit, it's fun to be with another Lowell on the call. So I have to call that one out there. So thank you so much, Ben. Hey, everybody. Lowell Duringo. I'm a Senior Manager for Learning and Talent at CrowdStrike, Inc. It's a cybersecurity company. However, did not get my start out in cybersecurity. I've actually began my career at the Walt Disney World Resort in Orlando. So I've always been in the entertainment and hospitality industry. Learning and development always been a big passion of mine. And so I had the opportunity to work for the Disney Institute as well as Disney University and leading their Emerging Leaders program, developing the managers for Disney World, which was awesome. Moved out to California, led the global talent development team for the video game company Activision Blizzard. Was there for about 5 years, and then after that moved over to CrowdStrike. This is my first remote role. It's been a big shift for me as well. It started this job during the pandemic, and so definitely have a lot of personal experience and stories to be able to share in regards to not only living and working in the remote environment, but then also being able to train, deliver content and learning in the remote environment. So just happy to be here and meet you and meet Detlef.
Thank you, Lowell. You know, I was also hired during the pandemic, and so this is my first remote position, 100% remote, and we'll talk about it in a minute, but it's quite the experience, to say the least. Detlef, I'd love to hear from you. Tell us a little bit about your background, what you've been involved with, the organizations you've worked with, and yeah.
Thanks, Ben and Lowell. Great to build on what you guys started. When Ben and I connected, and Lowell, actually, we realized there's a number of common things that we have. One is actually our love for Latin America and the Spanish language, which is one part of my reality. I'm a trained work organization psychologist, and I worked initially in education and then moved in adult learning. And then from there, I worked a few years as a consultant in a consultancy company, really going into all kinds of different organizations where we would set up talent development programs, leadership development, change processes, and also training programs, of course. That was part of it. And then quite quickly, I moved into diagnostics within Roche, a global organization of 100,000 people. And diagnostics is more a tech company within a pharma company or a biotech company. And so I worked in HR for a few years there. I moved into global roles after that into pharma. And ever since 2007, I've been in a remote virtual setting, really focusing on learning and development roles in the business. So I worked in R&D, in functions, in transformation programs, and then moved for 5 years to Genentech, to Silicon Valley. And that was a fantastic time, I have to say. Really enjoyed the exposure to the companies and so on. And moved back in 2019, right when COVID started or initiated. And ever since, I've been in my living room. And that's what I used to say. So within that, the audience was one of the things that I briefly wanted to mention is right now I'm focusing on R&D. So these are scientists, statisticians, they're operations people as well. And what they do is basically they bring the research on, diagnostics tests of COVID that I think all of us have been using during the last 2 years, but also potential therapies to patients around the world. That's my main focus right now. I've been working in digital learning for a moment, and right now I'm part of a new group that's being set up with focusing really on capability building for these 6,000 people in R&D.
Amazing. What an incredible background the two of you have, and so much. I'm excited to dig into the experiences that you've had and some of the stories you can share about things that worked in learning development and things that didn't work so well. Sometimes we learn some of our best lessons from the moments where we took a turn and it didn't go as well as we hoped. Detlef, speaking back to the similarities, so tell us, where are you at the moment, physically located geographically? Are you?
So I happen to be I happen to be in South America right now for a week. And then I'll go back to Switzerland. Working remotely is really part of one of the qualities we have. And FlexOffice has enabled, I think, all of us to be productive and to connect with everyone around the world in a very efficient way. So it doesn't really make a difference, because what you see is right now we have a digital conversation. We can connect, share ideas, and develop and bounce around ideas really also in the same way. So yeah, here we go.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Well, great. I think it's an excellent introduction to the both of you. Thanks for participating. I want to just read through the summary of the webinar, mostly because there's a couple of points here I want to make sure we focus on. So according to LinkedIn Learning's 2021 Workplace Learning Report, we hear that workers are feeling more lonely and more disconnected than they were pre-pandemic. I can relate to this. I was, again, Lowell, you and I were both hired during the pandemic into remote positions. And I didn't realize until probably 8 to 10 months into isolation during the pandemic that I was feeling depression and anxiety, and I realized that it was all connected to not having as much connection with the employees that I worked with in the past and colleagues. I used to always work in an office building, and I really received a lot of excitement and warmth and connection with those people. And so I was trying to find new ways to connect with people online. So in your roles, obviously we've seen changes pre-pandemic, and now we're in pandemic and post-pandemic. I'd be curious to just get your perspectives on how learning has shifted, or how we've been forced to shift learning during this period of time. And let's talk about that generally, and then let's talk about specific things that occurred to address the changes in our work environment. And some of them might have been successful and some that weren't. So Lowell, let's start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I think what's interesting is when I joined CrowdStrike, coming into, I was new to remote. So there was a lot of even just trial and error on my part, because if I'm new to this, I think I'm a lot like you, Ben, where I'm used to being like in the classroom. I'm used to being in front of people. Yeah. And so I think one of the first lessons that I had to learn was, while the content can be applicable from one medium to the other, the delivery methodology has to be completely thought different, right? If you think of it as, this is television, at the end of the day, you're performing. Just like you would think the classroom is theater, this is television. And you have to be able to use the medium to your advantage. One of the big things about television is everything has to be, I wouldn't necessarily call it scripted, but it certainly needs to have a very well thought out production of what it is that's going to happen. Because once you go live, the ability to be able to think on your feet, your capabilities might not be as easy to execute as it would be if you were in the classroom, if you were in person in front of someone. And so I think one of the first lessons I had to be able to learn was the way in which you deliver the content. For those of you who are facilitators out there, you all probably know this. The way in which you deliver the content requires a certain level of confidence that you have to discover for yourself, because you don't get the same head nods or smiles or laughter or, just that level of engagement that you normally would in the classroom. One thing I didn't mention earlier, though, is I do improv, acting, comedy, or at least I try to. And so we, in the comedy troupe that I'm a part of, we went to virtual shows. And you want the hardest thing in the world? Try riffing off of another comedian through Zoom with the lag, with the delay, not seeing your audience, not hearing the laughter. In order to get over that fight or flight hump when you are delivering on camera, you just have to really kind of say to yourself, I am funny. I have to pretend they're laughing at me. I have to pretend they're paying attention. Otherwise, the amount of insecurity that starts to just collect while you're delivering is going to overwhelm you, and you're not going to be. Then you're just going to want to get out of the training, right? You just want it to be over with. And so that was one of the first things too, right? Is that while the content can certainly be the same, the way in which you deliver it has to be a little bit more deliberate. Happy accidents don't happen as often in the virtual space. Things have to be a little bit more purposeful and more intentional and thought out, because from the audience perspective, it has to be a seamless show. It's just like television. It has to be seamless. They can't see what other crazy is happening outside of this box, right? So definitely one of the biggest things in terms of learning delivery that I had to be able to rethink when delivering training.
Yeah, that's so fantastic. So summarizing that, content's important, but the delivery mechanism and the way we produce that in front of the audience in a virtual setting really matters more probably, and is going to impact the class in a different way. I mean, we're in this world where we're streaming Netflix and Hulu and podcasts. Everything is just all produced and really well run. I feel like we have a little bit of competition, right? So our productions have to be engaging. They have to capture the attention. Otherwise, people check out.
Absolutely.
And way more than they would even in the physical space, right? Or I think it's
in the
easier.
physical space, there's a social contract that they at least have to feign that they're paying attention.
Right. Yeah.
Right? But I always
might be similar, but yeah, you're right. There's this kind
I
of
always joke that when you see someone's face go really white, you know they've opened up a new Google page, or you know they opened up their email. Like
Right.
You've caught them, you got them, right? So
That's awesome.
it's you're competing for attention.
Detlef.
And actually, you guys, you don't, you don't even see that, right? Because you don't have the physical reflection of what people are doing or thinking or how that is being received. I think you made such good points, and Ben, if you don't mind, I just pick up what Lowell was saying. You know, one of the things I think was good about COVID, with all the challenges that it imposed on all of us, that it was a shared fear, it was a shared anxiety, it was a shared experience we are all going through together. In a global community, if you want, and that has driven a common understanding of actually how we could think about things differently. And so content is available, as you said, Lowell, and then you can think about the architecting or bringing people together slightly differently. And everyone was thinking at the same time. It was a synchronous way of a starting point because of this shared experience. Mm-hmm. And so what I liked about it is that, you know, all of a sudden, informatics in your organization might have been able to speed up their process of delivering better tools and providing, you know, more functionalities to engage people and to make things more seamless and to take a little bit more risk. And at the same time, the mindset of everyone shifted at the same time, really in a way that we were saying, let's try out. If it doesn't work, that's fine. You can make a mistake. And we talked about this before we started the webinar, you know, and then you might have a cat walking into the camera. And at the beginning, that might have been weird maybe 2 years ago. Today is very common because it's so much more informal. It is more personal. It's more connected because of that. And digital has just helped to pivot everyone into a different space of interacting and connecting as well. Technology helps, but it's really the people who are the starting point and the mindset that we've been able to develop over the last 2 years.
I love that point.
That's just a few thoughts. Yeah.
I work for a software company, and it sounds counterintuitive to say software doesn't solve problems, but that's really the mantra that I lead with when I am working with as a consultant, or I'm working with other groups. It's the software won't fix everything. It's people and excellent strategy that fix things. And that goes back to this study, right? Part of this is saying that 92% of the community agreed that community-based learning helps foster a sense of belonging, but also it actually improves learning outcomes when people are involved in the process. It's not just asynchronous learning has its place, and I'm not saying e-learning is bad, but when you include more people in coaching and mentoring in groups and cohorts, the learning outcomes we've seen in many studies go up, they improve. And so I'd love to hear, Detlef, let's start with you. How is your organization today focused on creating more community-based learning? What does that look like? What are the various forms that you feel like that's being utilized or that you're attempting to make it work?
Yeah. There's one reference I'd like to make to a great book from Steve Wheeler, who has been looking at digital learning in organizations. And I just mention it because it raises so many good points that are reflected in the reality of today's organization. Ours might be a little bit more advanced in building communities because we're literally changing the org model into community-based ways of working in networks. Because today, problems and challenges we all have are so complex that we try to leverage networks internally but also outside of an organization. And so network capabilities, the ability to really leverage, tap into, build networks, broker my knowledge with yours, is key. And so community-based learning, there's a number of examples that I've been observing over the last 2 years, really. One example I'd love to give is related to the idea that learning is programmatic. Like we develop a program, there's some social learning around it, and so there's peer-to-peer learning, and that is fundamentally something human. You know, humans like to interact. We want to have a dialogue about things. We want to bounce ideas with others, feel supported, and tap into expertise of other people. So it is something that's really responding to our needs. The community itself then, and the example I wanted to give is something as simple as tech-enabled chat rooms. Today we have a lot of opportunities to create chat groups, and the shift I've been observing is that learning used to be very formal in some cases, sometimes very informal. People just leverage their own networks and they come together and they have a chat about a certain challenge they have. In the chat room, what's happening is there is a self-authored, self-governed, co-created way of sharing information, tools, documents. People throw in a question, others answer, and in some cases, this just works very organically and incredibly dynamic. I'm just blown away by the fact how self-organized this can happen through technology today. And people somehow feel connected and they feel safe to do that. In other cases, it takes you forever to get a community off the ground. And even if the technology is available, because it's probably the purpose of why people want to share something where they have a common ground, like we all want to get better in working agile. That's one of the things that we're trying to do. And so people are sharing their practices, their experiences, good or bad, the failures they have. And so this is happening very organically, much more self-driven, not even by L&D teams, and certainly not programmatic. It's much more democratized through people who all realize, I can curate, I can contribute, and step by step, they lose their fear of actually exposing themselves and just sharing an idea or asking a question.
I love it.
That's one of the things I've been observing really at scale, which is fascinating, I find.
Oh, I love it. I think the peer-to-peer element is so critical. In my own learning path, I feel like the people I learned from the most were colleagues who were in that same position or who had that same position previously, right? So observing them and listening and paying attention and then getting to really be mentored by them, it's such a valuable skill. And it's not something that an L&D team needs to run and needs to organize necessarily. I know some L&D teams can, and they do, but so many departments will run these organically, like you're saying, and work with that. So, Lowell, I'd love to hear the same thing, like community-based learning. What does that look like in your role today? How are you facilitating that? And how is the transition? How are you analyzing and improving those experiences?
Yeah, it's an interesting conundrum, right? Because when you have, I like to call it accidental happy moments, right? When you have a class, you're in person, you sit at a table, you don't know the folks that are around you, and you start to build a level of camaraderie. You start to have these free moments of exchange of ideas, and where do you work? How long have you been here? You get to really start to build those connections. When you have a Brady Bunch screen of 50 people, that kind of unintended conversations that can come up, they don't happen, right? Because it's not set up that way. And so what tends to happen is you lose that level of connectivity, you lose that level of just getting to know somebody on the side while you're in that classroom method. So how do you do that? One thing that and you'll hear me say this, I'm pretty sure throughout this thing, is intention, intention, intention. Everything needs to have intention. If you want people to talk freely, get together, 50 people on at one time, how many of you out there are always like, it's the same 5 people that will talk in a class every time? Well, it's even more so in a Zoom or digital platform, because the level of comfortability that people have speaking in front of that many people, it's very rare, it's slim. So one thing I had to realize was, you can't just do breakouts, but what's the point of the breakout? What do they need to talk about during the breakout? What are they going to do after the breakout when they come back? Who is going to be the spokesperson of the group? So it has to be that intentional, right? It can't just be, in a normal classroom setting, I would normally say, all right, this table over here, you're going to be the volunteer that's going to speak for your group. It can't be that loosey-goosey anymore. It has to be very thought out, because, again, when I'm looking at the camera right now, everyone thinks I'm looking directly at them. Number one, I don't know who I'm looking at right now. I'm just looking at a camera. So folks won't be able to pick up on those nonverbal cues to be able to determine how, who do I want to talk, who's going to be speaking there. So one of the big things that we've done at CrowdStrike in looking, especially with our people manager program, it's called Falcon Forward Managing CrowdStrikers. That's what we are, CrowdStrikers. One of the key things is, one, we've got to make it global because we are a global organization. We have to offer this program 2 times in order to try to capture as many folks from both, EMEA and APJ. So we'll do it in the morning, do it in the evening. We also want to make sure that it is cross-functional. How do we get folks to be able to meet not just people from different locations? So kind of like what Detlef was saying, let's use the software, let's use this to our advantage to build connections where connections might not have happened in person. But in order to do that, the registration process has to be a little bit more thorough. How are we breaking them up into groups? Am I choosing just to use the automatic breakout function, or am I actually combing through the roster, combing through each name and their department and their level to purposely diversify each of the groups? It's that kind of meticulous detail that helps to create those connections that might have happened in person, but will hopefully guarantee it in the group. From that point, in order to create these communities, I love what Detlef shared, is that it's not just about what happens in the classroom, but what happens afterwards. And the program Falcon Forward, not only are they involved in the classroom once a week or once every other week, we also utilize Slack. They have a dedicated Slack channel. But it can't just be about, okay, we have the channel, go have chat, go talk to each other. No one's going to do it. You got to prime them. You got to be able to throw in questions after the class. You're like, hey, everybody, great class this week. Here are some things. Here's a question. Throw it out there. You have to be the one to try to encourage the chat. And hopefully, at a certain point, they'll take it over. Mm-hmm. But if there's no one actually leading it to make it happen, it just won't happen. And so that's really one of the big ways that we've been able to create community, is to, again, be intentional about it, be planful about it, and ensure that it continues, that it sustains, because we all hope that it's going to keep on going. But in reality, when you've got 1,000,001 different priorities and different distractions, it's hard. We have a group of 90 going through our program right now globally. Wow. Yeah. So if we're not there to poke and prod them to keep going, it might not happen. But what's great is at the end of the 3 months, it's gelled, it's come together, and they've built connections.
Detlef, I want to give you a minute, but let me just follow up during one more thing. So you said that there's a 3-month program. So can you give us just a little bit more detail about how it's broken out? Like, what are the engagements? Are they all virtual instructor-led training? What are the modalities that are included? What are the activities? One last thing I'll mention is you mentioned intentional part of a breakout. Like the purpose of the breakout is the collaboration. But if there's nothing specific for them to do, then it's wasted. You're just splitting up. You're just going into tables with no activity in mind.
Then it becomes awkward virtual dating. Then it's all of a sudden it's just, hey.
What are we supposed to do?
Yeah, exactly. What's happening right now? No. And so it just becomes lame, right? So you have to kind of give them direction and then let it go from there. And then tell them, when we get back, here's what you're going to do. That way they know, there's a little bit of accountability that's in there, right? We better have something to talk about. But kind of going back to what you were saying about the methodology, it's a flipped classroom.
Okay.
So because we're competing for attention, we all know that an hour is already like 7 hours in the classroom, right? It's hard to keep their attention. So what we've done is we've looked at what the content for the program would be that we want to prepare our people managers with, leverage e-learning that we've curated. So we use LinkedIn Learning, we use Franklin Covey, we use Jana. Curate the learning that serves as a foundation for what we want them to gain. And then when we meet up for the 1 hour sessions, they would have already come prepared, having had completed those. They're all at a baseline. We now talk about application as it pertains to the company when we're in person. Because as we all know with adult learning, it sticks better when they know, oh, this is how I use it in my job.
Right.
Right.
So you're allowing the time when they're alone for them to go through the materials at their own pace, their own speed. And then when the flipped classroom part is, we come to class and we discuss in a lab format, collaborate about the materials and the concepts that we've learned individually, right?
And then from there, we actually send out a follow-up to their managers with questions that they can follow up and ask during a one-on-one of, what'd you learn?
Oh,
and
awesome.
So that way it kind of completes that entire full circle, right? And then we do that. So truly in 3 months, they've only been in class 9 times for 1 hour.
Incredible. Yeah. And that to me is the best value of the time. It's like using your time wisely. You could try to do a 3-week course for 8 hours a day, but it's just not nearly as effective when you spread it out over the 3 months and you have all these learning activities that people are doing individually, and then you're bringing the community together to really reinforce those concepts. And then once they leave, they're having more reinforcement with their teams and managers. Great. Detlef, I'd love to hear from you. One, if you have any comments on what Lowell's discussed, and then I'd love to hear if you have some similar type of programs that you can refer to or discuss, whether they're in your current role or in previous roles.
Sure. No, I'd love to build on what Lowell has brought up, and that is in L&D, sometimes we do think in programs, and then so for me, one of the key points in this new setup is that we use actually the flipped classroom idea. And I want to build on that because I'm working on an initiative called Flipped Investigator Meeting. Same idea. We're all familiar with the idea of flipping and blended. In this case, it is really the fact that you have only 2.5 hours where you used to have 3 days to connect people, engage them, provide a great experience, transfer knowledge, and at the same time clarify questions. And so the only way to do this in this case is, my colleagues who are in the business leading those processes, they might have 50 people in a meeting, or they might have 300 people in the same meeting, and 2.5 hours of time. So the only way actually to achieve what they want to achieve, which is everyone feels comfortable to be part of this community who's going to execute a study afterwards, and also have the right knowledge, is that they flipped everything. They take out most of the content. They focus on really the key content in the 2.5 hours, and the rest is Q&A, focus on critical questions. Think about a hot topic that is relevant for everyone. Like, diversity and inclusion is a big topic, in our case, even for trials. So that's a topic that will attract attention and also will help people to engage in these 2.5 hours. And then you split up. You might have 300 people, but maybe you're able to say these 50 people need specific content. You're focusing on them in the meeting in the first hour. They don't need to attend the second hour. So you actually are much more purposeful, as Lowell said, and intentional on how you architect the whole thing and also how you design the event itself. And then in addition, content choices is making your content much more crisp, spending more time actually on the quality of the knowledge transfer, because you only have so much time, and people, there's always a war of attention, I think, in general. So the flipped investigator meeting, I think, is a nice approach, which is more with the business. It's not programmatic, but it's the same principles we're applying. In another project that I wanted to mention, that's called Connect the Talent. That one brings up one of the things I've seen around being too organic and saying, guys, we start with a kickoff. We provide you with a platform. Platform has all the information. We then let you go, and you meet in a pod, a small group, to discuss a problem and actually pick out one of the skills. In this case, maybe collaboration, and you talk about it on your own. And you give people enough guidance so they can start, but then they have to figure out things themselves. What we realized in this approach is actually that everyone was saying, okay, we heard it twice. You explained us how this program works. I'm part of it, and I want to actually contribute, but I don't know where to start.
Yeah.
So I think we have to be much more intentional in providing information, not once, but maybe 2 or 3 times until it sticks and people have a chance to make sense out of it for themselves. Learning is always not just a copy paste. We have to integrate it in what we know already and make sense out of it. And that's really something which is individual for everyone and slightly different. So the balance between organic approaches of saying self-organized learning works and providing a bit of structure combined with scaffolding, provide support, explain them, give them a little bit of space which is protected so they can try out things and then let go. Then people will start owning. And the ownership is really, I think, one of the key things around community-based learning. People have to start owning, creating, having a voice in how they want to do this.
Sure.
So those are 2 examples that came to my mind.
Those are great examples. Both of you kind of discussed, like, there's a need for organic learning where we have a little bit more freedom to explore as employees and we can get around things. And then there's obviously structure and scaffold, which you said. So there's a fine balance. And it reminds me of one of my mentors in learning and development used to use the analogy. He talked about the corral, and he talked about the sheep and the cows in the corral. And he says, if you open up that corral and you just let them roam free, it's going to be very difficult to, one, bring them back and keep them focused on the material at hand. And so there's this delicate balance. Like if there are boundaries set up and if there's a decent, order to things, let them roam around where you want them to roam as opposed to anywhere they want to roam. I like the concept there, Detlef. It's just there needs to be enough organic to keep them interested and to keep them motivated. But if it's just do whatever you want, you're not going to be able to really accomplish the outcomes you've set out to achieve. And so there really is that fine balance. I wanted to open up for questions. We're a little more than halfway through the session.
Yeah.
Ashley, I'd love to see, are there any questions in the chat have come up that we can address with the panelists here?
Yeah, sure. I can share 2 or 3 with you. Let's see here. So we had one that came up in more than one question. It was sort of around around pre-work. So someone asked, how do you work with learners who don't do the pre-work? Someone else asked, any advice for how to increase completion rates of the e-learning pre-work for the built sessions for the 3-month program Lowell was describing? So are there any sort of advice in that area?
Love that. It's a great question. It's how do we get people to do their homework?
Public humiliation. It works every time.
Public humiliation.
No. You know what? That was, at the end of the day, there's a level of personal accountability that has to happen, right? Like, I think that's probably been one of my biggest hurdles to get over as a learning professional is, folks are going to want to get out of it what they're going to want to get out of it. And that therein lies one of the biggest challenges. We want them. We know the importance of it, but how do they see the importance of it? Well, a couple of things. Number one, make sure your e-learning is good, right? Did you go through it? Did you read it? Number two, is there a variety? Is it all e-learning, or is it some videos like TED Talks, or is it some that are just like maybe a 2-minute article read? I think that providing a diversity of resources that you assign helps not make it feel like a trudge to get through, right? That it's not just about click forward, but it's actually a variety that goes into it. Number three, are you talking about the content in the class itself? When they do the homework, does it apply? Because you almost want to try to pull that lever of FOMO, of that, fear of missing out. So if you are talking about it in class, it's like, when did we talk about this? Oh, it was in the homework. Oh, maybe I should do it, right? 4, allow them the chance to do it afterwards. That's fine. As long as I get it done, that's all that matters. And then 5, the thing that we've done is, rather than it being if you don't do this, this is what happens, we do it instead of, if you complete 100% of the curriculum, here's something that you're able to get. And so for us, we actually use BetterUp, the virtual coaching we provide a subscription to our employees who complete 100% of it. So, I get that we're very fortunate, and we're very, I get that not all organizations might be able to provide something like that, but what's in it for them if they do complete it by the very end? It can't just be, yay, you learned, but so we instead want to use a carrot at the end instead of the stick. And that's really how we are able to do that.
You don't have a certificate they can print out? Because I know those are really awesome.
I have one that says I completed my compliance training, but you know.
I know. I don't mean to make fun of certificates. That wasn't the point.
Oh, no.
Would it make sense? But like, if I'm a new employee, like completing my new hire learning certificate is probably not super appealing to me. I love the comments you made. Good content, diverse, relevant. Let them do it in multiple ways, and then if it's good and they're seeing the results from the other classmates who did participate in it, they're going to be more willing. Like the FOMO is helpful, but also like, oh, that actually helped everybody else. I'm actually going to pay attention and try that next time. Detlef, what thoughts? Oh, sorry, Lowell, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I'm getting too old in this to police. I can't anymore. Well, it's at the end of the day, it's going to be up to that learner, but we're going to try to make it as enjoyable, as useful as possible, right? And so that's really where it comes down to it.
Awesome, Detlef. Thoughts as you respond to that question?
Lots of things in common, Ben, and of what I heard. There's a few things I'd like to point out, which I totally agree with. One is I think Jeff Bezos was mentioned when he asked people always to sit down at the beginning of a meeting, because he knew not everyone would have read things, and so there's a moment in time where people actually can catch up. That's a simple way of giving some grace, and some people might not have done your pre-work, and that's fine, because the power of community and social learning is really that you can tap into others' preparation, others' expertise, unless it's social loafing. You do this all the time. Probably there needs to be a balance, right? The community will react to that. But the way to do it is make it public. Like, there's something like a social contract when you invite people to a kickoff and you can explicitly talk about things and expectations, which raises the expectations for everyone, and it's shared. And because we're humans, we don't want to look like, okay, everyone has done it, but I haven't. This is one mechanism, which is normal and helpful, I think, for everyone as well. So there's something around the contracting.
Sure.
The second one is the relevance. I would 200% agree. Any content that we provide has to be contextual. And if you want to apply one adult learning principle, is give people questions. Yes, we can put out videos or documents and a mix of different resources, but ask 3 smart questions to smart people, and they more likely will look at it and say, okay, how can I answer these questions? Maybe the pre-work is actually helpful for those, and it links back to my work, because this is where the value comes from, right? People can do something with what you ask them to do because it's their time, and we try to be respectful and also grateful for the time they invest. A few more things related to this is maybe, the teach back. That's an old thing. But if you ask people to teach back, right, they own the content, and you say, Peter and Susan, maybe you guys can take this up at the next, when we come together. Automatically, they're exposed, and so they will do a better job in preparation. So you give them actually a task to do. And last thing is, we work with coaching at scale. So we have a lot of internal coaching networks. But if you look at the market today, there are tons of digital platforms with coaching networks, and really coaching has been democratized. And so it's one additional element in reinforcing learning, no matter if people have done the pre-work or not. Just think about it in life cycle, and it can happen before or after or during, as Lowell mentioned. A bit of grace and trust in people's abilities, because usually it's not a motivation. I think it's the lack of time, and sometimes it's the lack of skills on knowing where to start. This is, I think, where we as professionals can really be helpful. That's what I would say.
Nailed it.
Yeah.
Yes. I think the grace part, Detlef, yes, I think more than anything else, just knowing that it's not from a lack of desire of doing it, competing priorities, kid walking past the computer. Like, there's just so many things. But yes, I love that.
I don't think, guilting the adults into some of that, it doesn't necessarily usually work out in your favor. It doesn't engender loyalty and appreciation. In fact, it just kind of makes you look a little small, to be honest. Yeah. It's a petty thing, and it's a punitive measure, and I think it's outdated. That kind of, and to be honest, I think generationally, it doesn't work nearly as well as it used to. My dad and I guess my grandparents, the baby boomers, as we talk about like generational differences, that guilting people, it doesn't really hold as well. I have a 13-year-old daughter, and it's not very easy. It doesn't work. It's like, meh, so I think as the generations are increasing here, and we have variances in those generations, we have to adapt. And that's one thing I've noticed is the guilting and that punitive measure just doesn't have nearly the impact that it might have in previous generations. I want to mention, since we've got Detlef, who's got so much experience specifically in the psychology of the workplace and employee psychology in workplace, I wanted to talk about how are we providing the psychological safety that's required in the learning environment. I think that's a big part of creating good community and having good outcomes, is people feel psychologically safe. So Detlef, I'd love your 2 cents on that topic. Where does the rubber meet the road with this topic? How do we make that more effective?
Whoa, it's a big topic, and I think it has been on everyone's mind ever since COVID started. There is this idea of the social glue that you can create. Initially, actually, Amy Edmondson's psychological safety focus was teams. And fact is that whatever we do in any organization is driven by teams usually, and teams are diverse. And because we know that fosters creativity and innovation. And so the diversity is, on the one hand, superbly helpful, but it also can create challenges because we're different. And so over the last 2 years, particularly over the last 2 years, there was such an effort to talk about psychological safety, again, understand what it means, and then also put a lot of workshops out there and opportunities for people to understand what we mean by psychological safety and how to embed that in communities. The one thing that I discussed with Julian Stutt, who's someone who's focusing on this element of social learning and social community building in organizations, is that it's good to talk about psychological safety, but actually it's not a precursor for building communities. It happens with and through people. It's a judgment more than a precursor. Like we talk a lot about building psychological safety and say, all right, what that means is that everyone feels safe enough to speak out, share any idea, make a mistake, ask any questions. And then when we're in this digital setting, we realize, well, actually, it's great we talk about it, but it feels different right now. Like 20 people in the room. Yeah, we say we have psychological safety, but then maybe between the lines you read that, I'm not sure I want to share this idea. I'm not sure I'm going to ask this question right now. So the point is that it's great to have knowledge about psychological safety, but really what seems to be as important is that we realize it's not a one moment and then it's a precursor and it's created, let's go and work. It happens all the time through a judgment call because it's a shared belief. We right now believe we have this level of safety and can talk about it, but you know what? In 10 minutes, it might be gone. Yeah. And it's just the past experience that reassures me that next time we come together, we might be able to talk openly as we did before. So it has to be built up. We can easily lose it. It's not like a switch on and switch off. It's a constant, purposeful observing of ourselves, others, and the interactions that happen, particularly in the digital space. And the additional layer, and then I pause, but the digital and hybrid layers, of course, again, what Lowell said, we have to be so much more purposeful, intentional in how we draw in people, enable also the different voices to have a voice in the conversation, and balance contributions of each and every one. So there's a number of things that we can do, but it requires very conscious and intentional efforts. Much more explicit, as Amy Edmondson says.
Yeah, I love that. I've had the similar feeling about a company culture. We talk about making sure we have the right culture. And it's like, how do you build a culture? It's fluid. It just continues to move and change. As every new person that comes in the door, every person that leaves, every interaction, every experience is shaping and molding the culture. And it sounds very similar to psychological safety. It's like the pottery wheel. Like, it's the pottery wheels keeping moving, and every interaction with the art changes it and it affects the shape. Like, that to me is what culture is in a company, and it never stops. That pottery wheel is just constantly moving. So it's like, how do we shape it and try to maintain the shape that we want? And every day it's going to slightly change. I love that. Lowell, any just small thoughts to add to that, and then we'll try
absolutely.
To
just thinking about psychological safety and how to create it in the group. I mean, it can literally come down to very simple things like providing security, letting them know this is what's going to happen. Like, there's no surprises. Yep. I think that's a really big one, right? That they know what they're going to get. They know what the objectives are. They know what questions are going to be asked. There's no surprises, right? I think that's a big one. No, as much as people like to say they like surprises in that kind of classroom area, probably not. Number two, how do you create that level of affinity amongst one another, that they all feel like a sense of belonging, feel like a sense of connection? One of the first things I do every time we start the Zoom, as people are coming online and I see their names come up, participants, regardless if I have 5 or 500, I'm going to do my best to greet each one by one. Like, it'll literally just be like, hey, Gary, hey, Julie, hey, Ashley, hey, hey, CLO webinars, whatever. So, right, you just kind of go through, and it just immediately, it's like, I am seen. The person knows that they're seen. They're not just one in a number. And can it be challenging? Yeah. Sometimes it becomes kind of funny to watch, especially when a whole group of people come in. That's a big one. And then number 3, I think multiple ways for people to contribute that is comfortable within their comfort zone. Meaning, not everyone's going to want to say something. If people didn't get a chance to say something, hey, for those of you who didn't get to share, throw it in the chat. What is it that you had, right? Giving people multiple avenues in which to participate. So if you have those who might be a little bit more introverted, those who are more extroverted, those who want to talk in a smaller group rather than in a bigger group, looking at multiple avenues for folks to participate that's comfortable for them will help not only make the experience better, but it will also hopefully get them to come back for more, right? Because it's like, oh, I don't have to be outside of my comfort zone for this, right? And so that often works.
Yeah, these are great thoughts. In fact, I kind of feel like those were really kind of like final thoughts to both of your comments, and just that last section is really, it kind of puts a little button around the whole conversation of how are we making sure that the community is intact, even though we're in a hybrid environment where the 3 areas I kind of talked about is you might be at a home office by yourself. You might be at a physical location office where other workers are there as well. And then you may be at a remote satellite office like a WeWork where you're still isolated. You're maybe not necessarily with people that you work with directly, but you're with other professional people in their workspace. So there's a lot of ways to address all that. I find that really interesting. I'd love to just spend the last 5 minutes or so with any last questions from the participants. Ashley, is there another topic that you're seeing that come up a couple of times we can address real quick?
Sure. So one question that a couple of people were asking were, how do you measure your engagement? Whether it's in Slack or your chat room based technology, and what does good look like for your organizations?
Wow, fantastic questions. Detlef, let's start with you.
It's interesting because we're in an agile environment, and so we iterate a lot. And one of the measures for us is actually that the customers have a voice in whatever program or community we're building. It's really a co-creation. So measurement is not just metrics anymore. It's much more getting a sense, a pulse check. We call it this sensing, what's happening in the organization. And you recognize signals. And the signals inform, actually, if you're on the right track. So it's about bringing people earlier in when you're building your community, but also when you're building your program. And so it's not like anymore there's the producers and here's the users. It's actually something you try to do together. And so the thinking is much more iterative. It's much more based on signals. It's much more based on continuous feedback loops, because we're learning together, right? And if you frame it in the way that you say it's about experimenting and getting better over time, people buy into that idea. So you don't have to measure metrics and say, you still need data, but the data comes in continuously, and that just changes the conversation and the engagement, I'll say, as well. That's
amazing.
Maybe one of my thoughts.
I like that. Just a pulse check instead of, like, these are the measurements that we need. It's all these various signals that are kind of continuously in front of us that we can make our own determination of what that means, right? I love that.
I think, for us, it really shouldn't be too different than versus in person, or that, because at the end of the day, did the learning happen? Are they able to apply it? Are they able to use it? I think for us, what we've discovered is not only asking questions. So we do survey, at the end of every class. It's what we do. But what we've done is we've added more employee engagement questions in addition to. Are they finding the relationships they're building helpful when they're in this program? We even ask an ENPS question, right? After participating in this, would they recommend this to, a person who was interested in working here? Like, we're trying to ask more questions surrounding engagement, as well as, your standard Kirkpatrick type of questions of, did you like the content? Was it pretty? Whatever it might be. But it's really important for us to understand, is their community being built? Are they finding that to be true when they participate in this? Not just as a learning applicable and they can use it, but are there relationships being built? And is that an important component of the experience? And every single time the answer is always 100% yes.
Amazing. It's so valuable to be able to measure. Sorry, go ahead, Detlef. Did you have one other thing to add?
No, that was just, it's the way you ask the questions which has shifted, I think. Yes, you can have metrics and see how many people participated and, is there traffic on your platform or in the community? But what's even more important is has this been helpful, and what would be your recommendation to improve it over time? Because this is what makes it stick and enables people also to say, well, actually, this community is a great resource for me, or this program is a great resource, and I'll go back when I am back to work and think about a performance consulting tool, right? Something I can quickly use and then apply when I need it. So it's much more just in time, and it's more the engagement that enables this, because then people are willing to go back and have a look.
Yeah, that's so good. Our mission at class, I'll throw in the final comment here with regards to this same topic. Our whole mission was to, how do we enhance and make better that virtual learning experience? My philosophy is that just because we're not physically present, it doesn't mean that the experience has to be a lesser than experience. It can still be very positive, and we can still feel a lot of connection. However, with that, it would be helpful to have better tools at our disposal, and tools that are designed specifically for virtual learning. And that's really class's mission. And our mission is not only to provide you those tools, but also to provide you the data behind what's happening. So is this class engaged? I don't know. Instead of telling you what engagement is and what good engagement is, we'll provide the metrics that are occurring, all of the signals, Detlef, you're talking about. During those sessions you're having, what are those signals? It's hard for the facilitator to see everybody and to pay attention to everything. So the tool that we have is providing you data on the back end so that you can go back and evaluate later and even see some stuff in real time. Man, Billy's not focused anymore. He's on some other platform doing something else. Like Lowell, you talked about the brightness. Oh, he's checking his email. We have it built into the system. It'll tell you if they're leaving the platform, doing other things, and getting distracted. So I feel like there are tools out there that you can look to to provide better insight into the process, those signals like you talked about, Detlef, that will help you then curate a measurement to some degree of what is good and how do we improve. And I think, I guess we'll leave it at that. We're wrapped up at time. Lowell, thank you so much for attending. Detlef, I feel like we've just had, decades of wisdom from the two of you just dumped upon us, and so successfully so. So thank you for all of your participation and your experience you've shared. And I appreciate everybody for joining. Ashley, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you so much. Yes, and a big thank you from me as well to you, Ben, Lowell, Detlef. I feel like through this and even through our content planning call that we had prior to this, you all just have a really great chemistry. So it's been fun to work with you and kind of go through this discussion. So we really appreciate you being here. And a big thank you to everyone in attendance today. Thank you for joining us. And finally, thank you, class, for sponsoring this event. So look forward to seeing you all soon. And Steve, I'll let you wrap it up.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Just like she said, thank you to all our speakers for taking the time to present with us. We really do appreciate it. We do want to thank the audience as well for joining in and to continue to support our Chief Learning Officer webinars. And of course, like Ashley said, thank you to Class Technologies for sponsoring today's event. Be sure to register for our next CLO webinar taking place Thursday, March 31st, titled Create a Future-Ready Workforce by Developing Agile Learners. Happening Thursday, March 31st, 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. This concludes today's webcast. Stay safe, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.